We'll go ahead and get started. Hello, my name is Sam, and I am a volunteer with the Green Burial Council, a longtime volunteer with the Green Burial Council, here to introduce what funeral directors need to know about green and natural burial. Welcome to the first Green Burial Council Conference. The GBC is an educational and nonprofit organization that also certifies natural burial cemeteries, product providers, and funeral homes who support green burial. Your support of our work in promoting eco-friendly, meaningful after-death practices is deeply appreciated. It's been a really great conference so far. I'm so excited to be a part of it and very excited to be here to introduce this particular one. Our sponsor today is White Eagle Memorial Preserve Cemetery at Econe Ranch. It is a conservation burial ground in rural southern Washington state. It's a part of Sacred Earth Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit land stewardship organization that also hosts land-based programs for kids and adults. White Eagle offers meaningful, family-led natural burial experiences in a 20-acre oak and ponderosa pine forest. A special shout out to Jody Buller as well. If you didn't hear when we first were getting logged in, please make sure that your name is accurate with the name that you used to register so that we can get you into the attendance log. Also, we just wanted to remind you that we hope that you can just use the chat only for questions, because at the end, we're gonna pose these questions to Elizabeth so she can answer them for us. And it'll be really helpful for me so that I can go through them easier. So questions only in the chat, please. So to introduce Elizabeth, Elizabeth Fournier began her career in 1990 in Portland, Oregon, where she was employed as the live-in night keeper, sleeping in a trailer in a large hilly cemetery. 30 years later, she is a one-woman funeral service in rural town of Boring, Oregon. Elizabeth owns and operates Cornerstone Funeral Services, where she is affectionately known as the Green Reaper, which I love. And she's called that because of her green burial advocacy. Elizabeth is the author of the Green Burial Guidebook, which we have right here. Everything you need to know to plan an affordable, environmentally friendly burial. She recently gave a TEDx talk called Going Green, the Last Act of Environmental Volunteerism. People magazine wrote, Elizabeth Fournier is doing her part to change the way Americans bury their dead. So welcome, thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you, Sammy. Wonderful introduction. I met Sam years back when we both were on the advisory board of the Green Burial Council here, and he is a person with a wealth of knowledge and somebody who was really the right guy to lead the Green Burial course that came out a couple years ago, GBC 310, Changing Landscapes. You can find it on the GBC website. And also if you want to follow him, because he's a fun guy, look him up on Instagram at Funeral Farm, and he's there. Thank you to Lee, thank you to Kim, thank you to everybody who's getting this going. There's been such a breadth and a depth of information that people have been sharing, and it's been really so fun to be a part of this process. So without any further ado, Mr. Samuel, if you want to get our presentation up, I'm excited to teach you all about natural burial and talk about how to talk to our families about this, because little do they know it, but having one body saving the planet at a time is really what the world needs now. So can we get our first slide going?
So we'll need to hit share on, I think you'll have to hit share there.
Right. Oh, I'm sharing again?
Yep.
Sharing again. Hey, it was me. Okay, that's what you're waiting for. Okay.
There you go. Yep.
Do you want to move me? Let me see. Let me just kind of get me out of here.
So you can,
There you go.
There
okay,
you go,
so
minimize.
Good. Yeah, very good. All right, wonderful. All right, so look at this picture here. This is really that feel, that yumminess of what natural burial is. This is a Passages wicker shroud. And this was a woman who passed away in Portland. After they had the service and visitation here, she was sent to Austin, Texas, Southwest Air. There's airlines who will go ahead and send people without any sort of embalming. They use gel packs. And she was left into the hands of Melissa Unfred, who brought her out to Eloise Woods for a natural burial. And you can see here just how wonderful that looks. Look how peaceful this woman has this place to herself. The earth was moved and it's there in its natural state right behind. And of course, after the honoring of this woman, everything was placed back into the ground. This is really just what we're shooting for as far as giving back to nature, giving back to earth, and of course, giving back our love to the individual who served us and shared with us here on the planet. So, over the past 30 years of my personal funeralizing, I've really learned that it is so important for us to remember that we're just not in the family's presence to fill out that contract and to get the paperwork done and the disposition taken care of. But this job as being a funeral director that I'm assuming I'm speaking to most funeral directors, homes, people who are dealing with the end of life funeralization of it all. It's really an honor and a pleasure to help these families through this process. And for many people like myself, it's a calling and it's really a ministry. And I feel that it's our job to meet families in their grief and really meeting them where they are. Ram Dass has this wonderful saying. He says, we are all just walking each other home. And that truly, it cannot be anything but the truth. I think there's families that have never had someone die or they've never been the person in charge, and they really need us to invisibly hold their hand. So I come to you today when we're talking here to really understand that opening up our hearts and listening is more important than opening up our mouths and speaking. It's just understanding that to add that value of the green gift that we're trying to accomplish with natural burial is not only just such a wonderful reduction of a carbon footprint and a wonderful way to go out in eco-friendly style, but it's really giving love back to the family. So that's sort of my housekeeping bit that I really like to open up my talks with. Just like when you have a funeral and you tell the family to silence the cell phone and you point out where the restrooms are, I find it so important to set the tone of my talks with love, because that's ultimately why we're here, because we really are all in this together. Okay, get to my, I got too excited there. All right, so right here, if you take a look here, this was my very first blessing of my love for green burial, which started 15 years ago. There was this really gentle, lovely community that asked me to meet them at a local pub, and they wanted to discuss the burial plans for their recently passed friend. And they didn't really know at the time they wanted a green burial. They just wanted Wanda the Wanderer to be eternally laid to rest on their private land. They lived in an intentional community, and that's where their lives were based, and that's where they thought she would want to be. So this was this is what I came to when I came out to the land. And I talked to the family and I was pretty transparent with them, and I said, I'm not really sure how to do this, but I want to do this, and let's figure out how to take the barriers down and make this happen. So I made a phone call to the mortuary board, and from there I think I called Vital Records and I called the public health, and no one really had any answers. It was just sort of like, well, I'm not really sure, you can't do this, or you can, but I don't know. So a lot of phone calls kept going, and pretty soon I got the local county planning and zoning who asked for the address, and they said, well, there's nothing on the books that says you can't. So I thought, fabulous, that means we can. So it was that simple. I got a backhoe to come and prepare the grave space. People think that a permit is this thing where you have to apply like you're building a deck onto a house, but it's really just part of the death certificate in a lot of states. So we were able to get that going. And then by that following afternoon, we were having this amazing ceremony where this is actually not Wanda's tribe, but this is a really close representation of what we had that day. We went ahead and we carried her to the resting place with music. There was drums, there was chanting, there was kind words. There was just a tribe of people, her village, that wanted to get her where she needed to be. And we all held hands around the resting place. Her 3 sons, they lowered her gently into the ground. She was cloaked in a quilt that she made as a teenager. And we covered the earth with the soil. Everybody took turns shoveling. There was a dirt knoll on the top that compensated for the settling of the ground, and no marker, just the native foliage. And we had a closing prayer, and we feasted on fish that were caught right down at the local river, and it was absolutely fabulous. And I was always really sad that I didn't have a photograph of this, but it was one of those times that it was so incredibly personal and moving and special that none of us thought to grab the camera, and none of us thought to memorialize it with more than just our eyes. So I do encourage people, even though it is a really sacred space, to have somebody shoot some pictures, because it will be something down the road that somebody will be really thankful to have. So as I drove home from this place back to my funeral home, everything clicked for me in my life. I knew that I was an undertaker because of so many people who died in my life as a young child, but it really revealed itself to me that the deeper meaning of why I'm in the death care industry. And it was that watershed moment of really becoming convinced that this is what makes the most sense. That idea of coming from nature, returning to nature, the tribe of friends, that these people still drop off vegetables to the funeral home 15 years later to pay for my services. And I've really realized this is why I'm in this. This is why I do this work. So I'm just really thankful to be able to be at a conference a Green Burial Conference. That's amazing that the GBC is doing this, and it's all about natural burial, so we all can share what we've been doing and let people know this is attainable, it's something you can do, and let's get going with it, because this is really what we did up until 150 years ago. I'm not sure if all of you know that, but this is really what we did and what these things look like. So if I can give a little bit of a historical overview to you, because again, if you're talking to families, they might have these questions and say, well, where did it change? How come we are having an industry now when it used to be something so simple? So the normal course of preparation for bodies, it was really led by women in the home. They were the layers of the dead. They were the ones who were responsible for the preparation of the bodies. They washed and they dressed and they groomed, and the men were the one outside digging the graves. And from the start to the finish, there's really brought the family and the community together. Death was this really incredible, intimate experience. There is a visitation that was held a lot of times in the front parlor of the house. There might be a procession to the church or to the backyard. And this was the original funeral parlor. It was the front parlor. And now, of course, this has been moved, and we call the undertaker. The undertaker gets involved, and we go on to the funeral parlor rather than doing something personal like this. What happened was the Civil War. There was so many requests for these poor boys that had been killed on the fields to be sent back home, because families wanted them in their local churchyards or township yards. And so we needed to get them back home. The best way to do that was the trains. But of course, without any sort of refrigeration, transportation was a huge problem. It's really problematic. So a doctor like this gent here came along and decided that we were going to have some preservation, have it more readily available. We were going to get some arsenic and some mercury, some soap and some water, and mix this together, and then we could preserve the bodies until they could really be transported back home for burial. So this was happening behind the scenes. And of course, what put all of this on the map was our beloved President Lincoln. In 1865, he was assassinated, and he was actually the first known president to be embalmed. Of course, since he traveled by this train over 1,600 miles, he went through 180 cities in 7 different states. And this really put the concept of embalming on the map, because he was on the train. I mean, if you can really think about that, he was lowered from the train. He was placed in a presidential hearse. He was wheeled through all the adoring mourning crowds, because they really just had to see that this was really what was going on, because this man was so revered, and they wanted to pay their final respects. So of course, all this extended publicity, the idea of embalming was this miracle cure, and the death industry ultimately was born. And that's how we changed from it being such a personal thing to the idea of there's goods and services that we could take care of, and we could make things this grand. I mean, look at that hearse. Look at those people. Look at the people in the buildings there, a couple floors up staring. I think these pictures are so remarkable. I could have put 20 of these pictures in here because they're so fabulous, but it's definitely something. So if you take a peek here, then over time, the family graveyard was moving more towards something like this. Look at all the soldiers. The United States, they were establishing this huge number of national military cemeteries, and that's where the armed forces, the people were buried. They continue to be buried. And if you look at that and think about underneath there, you have to believe that there is definitely 1 million acres of modern cemeteries throughout the US, the groundwater problems we have, the toxins in the soil, and it's become such a problem over time. So the wonderful think tankers and fabulous people we have that are really rooting for making a change here, this is something that GBC put together. And if you take a peek at this chart and look at what's going on, it's amazing to think that each year in the conventional funeral and burial practices in the US, we're dealing with all of those trees and all that concrete that can come and all of the embalming fluid. And this graph is something that you can find. Also, this presentation is taped, so you can take a closer look at it too. But we're really realizing, oh my gosh, all these resources that could be above ground, we're putting in the ground. So we are getting to a point now where many people have said, let's go back to doing something a little bit more simple. People are living a green life. Let's kind of walk that talk and go on and have a green passing. And so I think funeral directors are really starting to take heed, hearing about green burial and wanting to do something. And of course, this back in 2005, this was green burial on the American map. Hopefully you all saw this wonderful show, 6 Feet Under. They had a great mortuary advisor. So much of it was so accurate. But this shroud here was made by Esmeralda Kent of King Caraco out here in San Francisco. And she was a fashion designer who decided to deal with her grief of most of her friends passing away from behind the scenes costume making and theatrical drama. So she turned into a shroud maker. And this shroud here debuted back in this show. And this was in the dying and death scene here for one of the main characters who owned the funeral home on the show. And this was on HBO, which means this became mainstream America. And this was something that people started taking note of. And I noticed after this too, people kept saying to me, hey, Nate on 6 Feet Under, where can I do something like that? So again, it just takes conversation. It just takes the media, even sometimes social media, to move things forward. So if families do ask and say, well, when did this sort of become this popular trend? Well, not a trend. That's why you can kind of describe the history and say, this is what we did ahead of time. We had a disturbance in America. We changed things, but getting back to nature, there's such a hot interest in this. And I think that's really because the baby boomers are really who are taking us back to basics. Those are the people born between 46 and 64. They are making choices about dispositions now for their parents and for themselves. And they're really bringing this ethic of recycling and respect for the environment, and they're making it to their burials too. And it's nice to see that it's creating opportunities for green people to get into the funeral industry, to become end-of-life doulas, to become midwives, to become celebrants, and to pass the message on. We're also having a change of the industry here where we're getting a lot of younger people in, and people who don't even want to call themselves a funeral director anymore. They want to call themselves a service provider or a service director, end of life director. Sometimes I will hear, everything from death care worker, all of that. And that's where we're getting, and it's nice that we're bringing it back in. And the reason people are interested is because it's really right there in the name, environmentally friendly. Green burials, they do away with the embalming chemicals and the extraneous, the cement, the steel, the other non-biodegradable materials. Conventional burials put so much of that stuff in the earth that we talked about, and that lack of the carbon footprint is really just becoming something that is so exciting and so sexy to people. So, would you believe that there is a dialogue where 54% of Americans are really considering natural burial? That was taken by the NFDA, the Natural Funeral Directors Association, did a poll recently. And that's over 50% of the people that are really interested in this. And it's really our job to educate and open the dialogue and get talking. All right, so how do you talk to your families about this? What is this? I know people really aren't cozy necessarily chatting about a subject that maybe they don't know a lot about. So it's important for you to take stock and think about what is your education on natural burial? Have you been watching the documentaries? Are you reading the articles? Are you reading the books? Do you follow Insta feeds? I have one, for instance, Elizabeth Green Reaper, and whenever I'm taking care of a lot of services, I'll ask families permission to put a picture of the shroud or what have you, and that's a really good way to learn. So there's a lot of us out there who are really trying to share knowledge. Have you been able to find someone who's directed a green burial, and have you been able to ask them details about the experience? And it's not so much necessarily all the details of the experience and how they did it, which is important, but I think it's really important to find out, how did it feel? Ask them how it felt differently than a standard burial, because that's what really we're trying to give families, that feeling of what they did and the feeling that things were right. It's really painting that picture and describing to them what a disposition will look like. And you remind them that they're not just saving the green of the planet, but they're also saving the green in their wallets. And I know that really, really grabs people's attention. If you look at these pictures here, there's self-lowering on the left. Someone handcrafted that casket. You know, a florist didn't just show up with a flower wreath or a saddle. This is something that people really found and put together and put on top. And here we have just all generations who are understanding this is something they can have in their life. I love the picture to the right where even, you know, the child is touching their loved one and being a part and realizing that this is their loved one now being committed to the earth, and it's a gift. It's not that someone died and they're getting buried. We're actually going to be regenerating. It's really quite a truly amazing thing. So there's puzzle pieces we need to work on here. And I think when it comes to green burial, people get really sort of overwhelmed when they talk to their families and say, okay, well, I want to tell families, yeah, there's some green cemeteries, and yeah, we can get them a natural casket and we can do this. But I think it's important, what I work with my families when they're doing this is to say, let's start backwards. Let's work backwards. Okay, where are you considering to have your burial? I think that's really important. You can try to find a green cemetery in your area. Sometimes that's difficult. There's a lot of cemeteries all the time that are opening up new green sections. First thing to do is, if you don't actually know the green cemeteries in your area, is to study them on the Green Burial Council website. They've made a search quite simple where you can check out actually an area, you can check out a region, you can check out a state, and you can just pop it in and you can find the local certified burial ground. So that's a wonderful tool they've given all of us for no cost to go take a look and see what's going on. So when you start looking around on that GBC website, you'll notice that there are 3 different categories of natural burials. And all of this information that I'm talking about is listed on the GBC site, but probably it's something important for you to know and to kind of break it down so you can see what it looks like, because I'm not sure all of you have been a part of a natural burial. But there's something like this. This is a hybrid burial ground. Okay, this is a cemetery which was already, this happens to be one in Portland. This was already here, and they've decided that they're going to set a section aside where you don't need to have a concrete box. You don't need to have any sort of a liner. They prefer, of course, they really don't want any embalming in the ground, and they want the person to be in an eco-friendly burial container or a shroud. And this, you can have regular or what we consider more modern burials in here, or you can have a green burial. So that's what's considered a hybrid cemetery. There's natural burial grounds, such as Steelmantown here in New Jersey. And this is the idea of there's no vaults at all. There's no concrete boxes. There is absolutely no embalming, no toxic. And what we're really trying to do is we're not trying to have anything that's not locally in the area. We're trying to have any pest management needs to be taken care of very natural. It needs to have a complete natural experience and a natural look to it. So meaning only plants and materials that are really native to the region. And we want the landscape to ultimately be compatible with the regional ecosystem. Okay, that's what a lot of the natural burial cemeteries, that's a lot of what they're doing. And then there's some, you find not as many, but you'll see there's some here. This is a conservation burial ground. And this meets the requirements for the natural burial ground, and it legitimates land conservation. But this is an area where it's going to be protected in perpetuity. The land is specifically and it's designed for conservation. So it must have some sort of an organization which holds an easement, which is there. There's a deed restriction. There's going to be long-term stewardship, and it's absolutely going to have a look like this forever. Okay, so you see the three differences there. One is more of a standard. One is sort of natural, and there's bird paths, what have you. And this one actually serves more of the purpose of having the easement and having the long-time stewardship plan in place. Another option, and this is something we can do in Oregon, and a lot of places you can do this, but backyard burial. A lot of my families are choosing to do this in the backyard. I happen to be in Boring, Oregon. It happens to be in a county called Clackamas. I happen to be in the rural part of the Clackamas County, and many families say, hey, we've got 30 acres out here, and why do we have to buy a grave in town if we can do this in our yard? Guess what? You can do this in your yard. So it's really wonderful to walk families through this and say, yeah, you can bury a person on residential property or property that's privately owned. You just need permission of the landowner. There isn't any sort of an endorsed cemetery, and the laws definitely vary state to state and county to county. And I cannot behoove you enough to always know your local zoning laws. And if you don't, get on the phone, make the calls, because families will say, can I do this in my yard? And you need to know, such as in California, no, there's no private land burial. You can't do this. The state of Washington, which is right across the border from where I am, says, well, we really don't want private land burial. However, if you have your own private island, you can do it on your own private island. And that might sound really ostentatious, but Washington has lots of private islands. So there is a chance, if that's something that would have ownership, that you can do that. So it's always important. And I would suggest if you want to call your funeral bureau, your cemetery board, mortuary zoning, if not, go ahead and your planning board locally for your county or your township. Hopefully we'll have answers, but if they don't, keep asking. Because if there's nothing on the books, well, that's where my opening was, because there was really nothing on the books. Okay. So private land burial, certain counties, again, I cannot say that enough, even though you happen to have 5 acres and you're in the middle of nowhere, nobody would even know if you did this, not okay. We follow all rules, all protocol. We have to have written consent. Things have to be recorded. And the main thing that I tell people to do is, if you have a deed, file the location with the deed. Make your own little map in the yard, mark it out, put it so down the road, 50 years down the road, you won't say, oh yeah, I think grandma's out there by that blackberry bush, because what if the blackberry bush isn't there? Or what if the person who knows that is no longer alive? It's really important to have it indicated specifically. And I always think, don't do the X marks the spot, do something more exciting. I put a heart there. I think it's a nice way to do that, so people know actually how to find that individual and where they are. So I know people are always interested in backyard burial and say, well, how do you do this? And what does this look like? And it's just important to know that in Oregon, for instance, because I can speak to this, because I know my rules exceptionally well here, because I deal with this, but 150 feet away from a water supply or a creek, 100 feet away from a drilled well, and 25 feet away from a power line. We also want to be away from the road. We want to be away from the setback of the property. We want to be away from the neighbor's building, all things like that. And just really important to not only have the land, but figure out where are you going to place the grave, and maybe learning how to walk someone's backyard so they don't find this gorgeous place, which is actually right by the cliff, or obvious tree roots, or about big outcropping of bouldery rock or horrible clay soil. There's all these things that we need to think about. So I'll go through this a little quicker, just because I know that not everybody, again, can do backyard burial, and most of you probably are doing cemeteries, which I understand, but I just want to touch on this because it is very important to have the education of what you can do. And how about your neighboring state? How far are you? Can you drive a body across state lines? What are the rules for transportation? And is this something that you would be able to do and help them? And what do you know about that? So I just want to show you what a grave space in someone's yard looks like. Sometimes people use a backhoe. Most people who have on their own property have a small digger, they have a small John Deere, they just do, because they have land, they're doing something, they have burn piles, they're just doing things like this. Shovels work great too. We're only going 3 to 4 feet down because it is a natural burial. So if you're going to excavate, You really have to have a sharp shovel. This is really, I think, the best part. You really want to make the walls somewhat of an even length. And something important that a lot of us always say here who teach families this is think about how much time it's really going to take to dig that space and multiply it by 2, because it's super tiring. And have like a secondary person, because you start digging and digging, and it's a lot of work to actually get that soil, move it to the side. It's a lot of work. And sometimes people dig a little bit too deep, or they're not very flexible. You might want to consider a small little step stool to put inside the grave so you can get back out to the area with ease. That happens too occasionally. So you don't have to go crazy to 6 feet, but just something 3 foot, but 3 foot, even 36 inches is hard for people to maneuver sometimes too. So backyard burial, can't say enough about thinking about your property, thinking about if you do move, you normally don't take grandma with you. Grandma becomes part of the ecosphere, and that's really the point anyway. But in America, we have such an ownership over graves and people and all that, but really letting that go and understanding that this person is going to be a part of the ground. And if there is someone on the private land, it might impact the future sale. It just really depends. There's so many like-minded people who, if you set the vibration correctly, they might say, wow, that's fabulous. I really like that. Where I live, I have a whole pet cemetery. We have horses and goats and cows, and I have a little rescue farm. And if anybody dies, out they go. So I can be in my kitchen and I can throw food and blessings out my window. But, people might not want to go where all my sheep once were and where they're buried. But again, it's just the chance you take. And if it's the right thing for you, you'll know it's the right thing for you to do. All right. Another option here is natural organic reduction. I know that idea of composting has been coming up quite a bit lately. And even though that's passed legislature in Washington, it's not up and running yet. So I don't want to talk too much about that because I can't share the variables about it being up and running. And if anything else you want to know about it, it's all over to read. But this man here, his name is Walt Patrick, and he's actually doing natural organic reduction in his forest in Washington. And this is him demonstrating this. He has lots of information on his website too. But it's that idea of you're going to have somebody composted. There's a cradle designed and it rotates. And ultimately, the floor of this cradle has some wood chips and some wildflowers and things from the forest. And the deceased is laid to rest in this. And there's some more wood chips that go into it. And so the whole process is, this is actually similar to green burial, but it's organic reduction. And again, it's one other option of disposition that you can take care of something that's green. We also, of course, have the aqua cremation, but I'm not going to get into that right now, even though that's a low carbon footprint of cremation, because I really want to talk about natural burial. All right. My family sometimes have a great sense of humor, and they put funeral coach on top of their own truck here. And even if you're going to go to a cemetery, which is a hybrid or a natural burial ground, most families in most places can use a personal vehicle to transport. If you want to find out more, there is a home funeral website, the Natural Home Funeral Association. They have a lot of information about the rules of these things to learn a little bit more about refrigeration, learn a little bit more transportation. Just find out, you always want to be under the guise of rules, but help families to the best of their abilities to do whatever the heck they'd like to do. So this was just a basic truck. You can use a station wagon, minivan. I've seen people use their Subaru with the back down and the hatch. And it's really wonderful for people to be able to transport their own loved one. I really feel like they feel like they're part of what's going on. But again, that idea of measuring once, cutting twice, I think it's just important to really measure the board, the shroud, the casket, whatever you have, and make sure it actually will fit in the vehicle, because it's just so sad if you're all getting ready to leave the home after your beautiful celebration and head out to the cemetery with the family and only find out their loved one is just 1 inch too much for the back of the hatch to close. That's definitely very sad. And this is one that's not my picture. Don't know where this came from, don't know who to give credit to, but I found this to be so lovely. And it really just should go without saying that during transportation, that dignity of the body is so very important. being able to have somebody covered, being able to move somebody gingerly, and just almost like when you're giving somebody a bath, being really loving and being really wonderful is just a great way to go. I think also being involved helps people move through their grief. It helps them really feel like they're doing a last act for somebody. So there's just so many pluses to the transportation piece, not just saving money on the hearse at the funeral home, but just that idea of you're really doing something. I mean, how neat, this person is next to their guitars. And I mean, this is just very personal. It might even be their own vehicle. And how wonderful is that? And also, I guess while I'm looking at this, I want to talk about greening the experience. Carpooling is super important if you're together at a church or a funeral home or someone's private house. How about carpool? How about, as Americans, we all drive our own car. What if everybody gets into a vehicle? What if everybody decides to forego any side of single-use cups? What if everybody decides they're not going to each have their own Starbucks cup? They're going to have a metal cup that they can refill. Even the idea of, rather than everybody cutting flowers, having plants that you can give, and hopefully succulents or something regional you can give to the family to take with them. That's a real wonderful way. Recycled paper for memorial folders. How about sustainable farm food for the morning meals? The idea of eating sustainably from farm to table. Another wonderful way to go. Okay, so we've talked about where are you going to be buried? The where. Is it going to be at home? Is it going to be in a cemetery? Also, if you don't find a cemetery on the list nearby you, what I've told people is give a phone call to small cemeteries, historic, Oddfellows, what have you, and say to them, can I bury somebody without an outer burial container? Meaning, can I just do this without having to buy a vault or buying a concrete box? And most of the times people are so thrilled that you're even calling them and that you're going to sell them a grave and they're going to actually, someone's going to be using their cemetery. They don't care. Some of them say, I don't mind. You just have to, here's the grave space. This is what you need to do. And that would be a natural burial. If you call some of these places and say, do you do green burial? They probably don't know what you're talking about, but you can circumvent that by saying, can we do this without an outer liner? That's a good trick to use for small town places a lot too. So for containers, take a look here. Cardboard. Most cemeteries will allow a cardboard box to be buried. Some say it's a little too floppy and we need to have some sort of a board underneath, but a shrouding board made of pine, something natural, no problem. Easy way to do that. The one in the middle is wool. I know we don't see a lot of wool caskets, and over to the right we have a wicker casket. These are wonderful. Also, you want to be sure things are made locally, because if we're going to have to get something from a different country and put it on a plane and come it over here, think about that. The fossil fuels you're using sort of circumvents the idea that you're trying to be supernatural in all of this. So there's the newspaper pod and just a shroud made out of canvas or made out of wool or linen, cotton, all those things, and just your simple pine box. Again, you can do things with non-toxic glue. You can do things with no metal. Seagrass, there's all these wonderful things that we can do. I have families who bring a lot of their own caskets to me. And this is the Vietnam veteran who brings these caskets. And this is what it really looks like. It's just strapped in the vehicle. Most don't even have a minivan or something discreet. It's just a bunch of blankets. And here it is, gorgeous casket. And also you have to allow, as a funeral home, someone to bring their own funeral casket or container in. There can't be, like, you bring an expensive bottle of wine to a restaurant and they have like a corkage fee, that sort of thing. You can't charge a family because they're bringing their own casket. But it is up to you to talk about dimensions and will this fit into the grave space? Will this fit into the vehicle? And something really big to think about, does it have handles? People don't always think about that. I think they magically think it's going to go from the hatchback to the grave. And how are we going to get it there? And are there some sort of handles to move this? Can we actually handle this like a piece of furniture, like it is something important? And yeah, inside the burial space is important. And this is a fun picture. This gentleman apparently has a kit, and there's a lot of these kits that you can buy online, or you can buy them at shops where you can make your own casket. And hopefully there's no metals. Hopefully there isn't any toxic glues. Hopefully we're just using dowels and pegs and making this really natural. But again, read the information on the website. If you buy something online, find those things out so we can make sure we are good Okay, because you want to make sure, again, you want to walk your families through it and talk about things that are natural, because it's our job to keep reminding them. Just because it uses the word natural or talks about it being green doesn't always mean necessarily it is. Okay, it's another picture of what a natural casket looks like. There's, rather than rope handles, we have just one big piece where people can carry. This is cedar. Another Vietnam veteran who I have caskets from, him and I will talk about who's passed away, and we'll walk through his forest, and he'll find the right tree. It'll just speak to him, and then it'll fell in his forest, and he'll make a casket from there. So yeah, that's Oregon, people are as wacky and kooky as I am. So I love the fact that people are so open and we're able to do things like this. And how wonderful that my artisan, he made a casket that was meant for you because he felt your energy after I told him about you. It's beautiful. Embalming chemicals, we're now going into having green chemicals. We're trying to talk about things that are non-toxic. They're plant-based extracts. Formaldehyde-free is the big deal here. Some things are made from different herbs. They'll, the essential oils and all that, they will adequately preserve a family. Will preserve a body. Kind of the same as embalming, but again, it's not meant to be forever. It's just if people don't want to have natural, it is an option. This is something you would need to do at a licensed embalmer would have to help you with. Wanted to show you what a lot of my visitations look like in my parlor. This is the cardboard box. The individual in there is holding his favorite fruit. His sister laid flowers on him. They used to sit at night and they used to eat apples and drink tea and read books. And those are some of their books. He was reading the book on the right. She was reading the book on the left when she passed away, and they put them in there. I just want to hug and kiss everybody that comes into my parlor because they are just so meaningful and so heartfelt and so wonderful. And I'm so honored they share this with me, just the personal moments. So this is Doug in my chapel here. All right, to show you again, to see this real life stuff that happens. This is a cemetery in Portland, which has a lot of famous Portland people. There's these huge headstones for all the people who have the names after the bridges and the streets. Yet throughout this, in Riverview Cemetery, they will allow burial throughout the park and just about most graves natural. So here's someone who loved Hawaii. He's in fabric from the local fabric store. We have him wrapped, everybody dressed in their favorite Jimmy Buffett wear. The woman on the right did a lovely dance, and it was just perfect and so wonderful. And there's a lowering device, and there's two cemeterians there helping. But again, all green burials look a little bit different. Some are lowering person with ropes. Someone will be in the grave space and somebody will hand them a loved one. Other times we go ahead and use the mechanics at the cemetery, and it's all perfect. Another grave space. This isn't my photo. Can't tell you quite where this is. But again, kind of shows you a little bit more of an alternative look. And I just find that this is just, I don't know, something that is just so heartfelt to me. And I really behoove you to bone up on your personal practices, what's out there, what's going on, so you're able to go ahead and answer these questions. I'm in Oregon, so I have to know what's going on, not in Portland, but also in Washington. And there's some really great rules out there and things that that guess what, they aren't even rules. And there's things that you're going to get asked occasionally along the way. You're going to get asked things like, can I refill the grave? Can we bring our own shovels? Depends on the rules of the cemetery. But people love that. There's something very cathartic about it. You get questions. You might get a question like, well, when I die, I just want to be kicked into a hole in my yard. Well, the way to handle that I found over time is we have to remind people that might be what you want, but we lovingly place people into the gentle embrace of the soil. We don't kick people in a hole. This is all a planned out thing. You're going to have people there who love you. People often tell me, I just want to be naked. I came into the world naked. I want to go out of the world naked. That's what I want to do. And I have to, again, remind them that that's wonderful, but there will be other people there, and not everybody is comfortable seeing your face. Placing soil on your face. Also, not everybody there is comfortable necessarily seeing your nude body. So just for the comfort of others, if we could have a sheet or a covering or something, because again, I don't want to poo-poo on anyone's parade, but I also just want to remind them that you're no longer here. The funeral is not for you, it's for the living. And we need to make sure your loved ones are content. And I think, are we pretty close, Sam, to a wrap time?
So we have about 15 minutes left.
For questions?
15 minutes left in general. So yeah, if you wanted to get questions in.
Oh, yes. I think many people, yeah, there's lots of questions. So I will just give a quick wrap and just say that, yeah, I have so many, I had such a hard time choosing which pictures I wanted to show because there's some that I found throughout the way that I think do a good job. And I have so many of my own of these experiences that are just beautiful. And you see here, this is a wicker casket. This family made all these vows. And again, they spent so much time with incense. And the nice thing about a natural burial is a lot of these cemeteries are so small and they allow you to take all the time you want. It's not a matter of in and out. And if we got to do this before 3 o'clock, you can have your time to do what you want to do. So yeah, I just have to say that green burial is such a wonderful way to care for our loved ones and to give back to the earth. And it's really what's happening now. People are driving their hybrid cars and their electronic cars and they're eating healthy. And I think it's a good way just to make sure everybody gets what they want. And that's just a little bit of shameless plug right there, but that's it. And I'm done and I'm going to stop sharing. Hey, yeah, I would love to answer any questions. And I think Sam will read things out of the chat box.
Sure, yeah. So our first question here, they want to know, can you explain how Kinkarako shrouds function versus a shroud with a lowering board? So how,
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So Esmeralda, who makes the shrouds at Kinkarako, she makes two types. She makes one, which is just the material. It'll be muslin or it'll be silk-based, and it will just be the shroud. Now, we need to put something underneath that because if you've ever tried to lower somebody into a grave, if they're smaller, again, you can have arm to arm in place. If someone's a little bit of average weight, even if you have two straps below them, or they're on some boards, what happens is a center of gravity. Everything wants to go towards the middle, and that's not the best choice. So again, families can choose what they want to do, but what I think works best in my experience is if you're going to bury somebody in a shroud like Kinkarako, or you're going to have the sheets off your bed, which are fine, some sort of non-bleached material. If you're going to do that, think about having a shrouding board underneath, and that can just be a simple pine. It could be something people have. A lot of her shrouds actually have a very thin 1x2 simple pine board inside. So that way you have a little bit more of resistance, you have a little bit more of a base, and then they have their own straps, and the body isn't such a floppy package and bundle. You actually have a little bit of a hold underneath it.
Okay. Another question is, have you ever offered to help dig a grave to mitigate the burden of hand digging a grave?
That's a fabulous question. I have these really great black boots. My brother always laughs and says, look at those. And I said, well, I'm standing around in mucky property. In Oregon, it rains most of the time. Now, what I can say about the digging, I'm not a very strong person. However, what I tend to help people start with is say, let's get the sod removed first, and let's do this in layers rather than just dig. Let's actually take a flat shovel and let's actually cut into the sod the size of the person's container. We don't have to go any bigger, and let's make sure we actually can line that out, and then let's remove the sod in layers so we can put it back in layers, because that's how it naturally grows. So we'll start with that process, and then sure, I can dig a bit, but normally I'm a woman. There's normally always a man who says, oh, let me help you, or I'm going to help you. And then I'm in Oregon. I'm in rural Oregon. Pretty much everyone has a cat, a backhoe, a digger. They've got something. And also just men say, it gets very to that point where the men want to do this. They feel like this is their job to do. So yes, I have helped. I've never dug a complete grave. That'd be quite an experience. I'm sure that would really test my acumen there. But no, but I have definitely been a part of the process. I think one more important thing I can do is actually help the family choose the correct place, because people want to choose this beautiful something or other, and they're not always looking at, like, again, the roots of the tree is a big one. I want to be right under that tree, but it's a huge oak and we're looking at these things. So that helping them understand that process is a really key thing for a funeral director to be able to do.
Yeah, those pointers can go a long way.
I think the question was actually asked incorrectly. My question was, do you allow family members, if they would like to help dig the grave? And the response that I got from Ms. Lee was that there's litigation problems. But what happens if you have a cemetery which the owner would allow the family members to come in and help dig the grave? Is that an option that you ever give people?
Yes, and what I have come up with, that I appreciate the question. What I've come up against is normally the sexton, which is the grave digger from the cemetery, will be on hand, because I think people have the idea, I want to do this for mom, but they don't understand what an undertaking it is and how much work it is. And of course, there's a liability. Nobody wants you to get hurt. Nobody wants you to do
Right.
stuff. And also, they need the graves to be in a specific area, so there will be someone to oversee that, to say, let's kind of shore it up here. So, but I believe if it's cemeteries all have their own rules, you can ask for as much as you want or whatever you want. Sometimes I've never even been asked questions before, but I know everybody worries about liability.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I have another question here. Have you ever experienced interfacing the desire for green burial with a conventional cemetery? For example, if someone already has a family space in a cemetery, but desires a green burial.
Absolutely. And I can give you my personal story. My father and I have been exceptionally close my whole life. My mother died when I was little, and so I was always his person, all through the dementia, all the way to the end. And I knew he wanted to have the church service downtown. He's a devout Catholic, wanted the Monsignor, wanted a casket, which looked standard. So his Catholic singles group would be comfortable, but it would be looking green, so it was natural. And then we were in a little Catholic cemetery where my mother is and where his parents are. And the guy said, no, this is how we do it. And I said, well, and that's where I could use my education. And I could say, well, how about this idea? And then we worked on the grave concrete liner being upside down. So my dear daddy would be lowered, and then the concrete would go opposite. So that way, technically there is a liner. Technically the soil, the earth will all be not wavy gravy, be all like a lovely memorial park, but he'll still get his natural burial. So you can have a very thought-provoking, kind, sane, reasonable conversation and say, let's think about what if we did this? And that would be fine. I find always demanding and telling people you're not getting what you want doesn't work so well. It's just like human nature. Just say, hey, this is what I've seen. This is what I'd like to do. What do you think? And he said, well, that's a great idea. So hopefully I started something there.
So I have a three-part question. What was the most difficult experience, funniest experience, and memorable experience that you've had with a burial?
Oh, that's fun. And I guess if I was cool enough, I could say it was all the same person. But the worst was always a child. I mean, a child, a baby, you can't get around that. There's nothing that you can say to the family. I think there's a piece in 6 Feet Under, where Brenda says to Nate, if you know this show, she says, if you lose a spouse, you're a widower. If you lose a parent, you're an orphan, but there's no word for losing a child because it's such a horrible thing. And that's always stuck with me. And so I think there's nothing you can say. There's nothing you can do. It's not the right way it's supposed to be. And that is depressing. And I cry as much as the family. And even thinking about it just feels, my heart just, such a horrible, horrible thing to think about. The funniest would probably be, well, I'm not sure, this is a little bit tacky, but there was a woman who was very flamboyant, and her family wanted to wrap her in these very flamboyant sheets. And her girlfriends were drinking when they wrapped her in this very flamboyant sheets. And I kept saying, no, let's do this a little bit. I'll tell you what, let me just step in a bit. We need to tighten this up a bit. We need to do this. Well, they just, and they were having lots of fun. And sure enough, we got out to the yard and the sheet all went haywire, and there she was exposed. And everybody thought that was hysterical because she was really an exhibitionist. So she really got the last laugh. So that wouldn't be funny, but the family, that really made their day. So that made that funny. And did you say meaningful, or what was the third? I'm sorry.
Memorable. And I don't know if you don't know, the video isn't sharing. So if you wanted to share your video, because
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I do exist. Okay. Here I am. Hi. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Last piece of the question was the most memorable.
The most memorable. That would be one. I wrote a book called The Green Reaper, and I wrote about it in that book. And it was a family who he had me come to his house, and I was there inside, and we were there from finding the space to assembling people. And when I went in the house that night to get everybody ready, I walked into the house and there was someone painting her fingernails and somebody making food, and somebody playing the guitar. And it's even to this day to think about it, was so, the love in that one room house was overwhelming. And then we put her in this little cart and we brought her out to the grave and the sunset. And again, so many of my natural burials are so beautiful and so delightful and so wonderful. So thank you for asking. I'm always thrilled to talk about Jamie and her lilacs and her beautiful purple. Yeah, that was lovely.
So is there any other questions that we have for Elizabeth? I wanted to ask you, Elizabeth, so I do teach the GBC 310, and I usually give a survey out to my students at the very beginning of the course, asking them what they're most interested in to learn in the course. And this year, the most popular was culture, but then the second most popular was green embalming. And so you mentioned it in your slide, but I wonder, how often have you had green embalming as part of a service?
Well, right. So personally, I'm not involved in the embalming. I did not go to mortuary school because I did not want to be an embalmer. And I knew this from early on. That's not what I wanted to do. So I have my degree from, and my another degree from college, and then went on from there. So I don't embalm. Families, I think when families come to me and they originally have the idea of embalming, they might say, I heard about this green stuff, and we talk about it a bit. But ultimately, after we talk about all of the variables and all the things we can do for cooling techniques and bathing, and especially if I'm willing to come to the house and help them with dried ice or help them do things with the sponge and what have you, we end up doing no embalming whatsoever. So I find it to be something which is really even almost a moot point. There is somebody locally who, if I do have a family wants an embalming, who will take care of that for me. And he does have some green chemicals, but he says also the same thing when it comes down to it. I think I present such a strong case on why it's not necessary within the guise of the law that we always find a workaround, especially if I'm willing to come, go to Baskin & Robbins and get that 20 gallons of dry ice and with 20 pounds and go out and be able to help and tell them, call me 24 hours a day. We can work around it.
All right, so I have a couple other questions here. In general terms, what do you think it would take to do natural burials in spaces that have little use in urban areas, like abandoned spaces, maybe under power line corridors?
I think it would be somebody negotiating the ownership of that land. I think that's what it comes down to a lot of times in Oregon. Abandoned anything, it's a matter of, well, who owns that over there? Because if it's private property, you'll need to get the rights from somebody. And that's where development comes in. Somebody will come along and say, hey, this is just sitting here. I want to do something with this. If a body's by electricity, that's not so much a problem. We're working more about fresh waterway, tributaries, things like that. So we're okay. The main thing is setback. People don't want to have a grave right across the fence from their own property. You'll get somebody who has 40 acres and they'll say, ooh, way in the back corner over there. But the problem is, yeah, but right across the fence, 10 feet away is someone else's house. So I think in that case with a small area, sure, if your county is okay with it, and that's the big thing too. If you don't know who owns the land, call your county zoning and planning. And that's how different spaces have been purchased and used along the way, because people inquire. You don't know if you don't ask.
Sure. Okay, what type of cooling seems to be the best? Mats, dry ice, refrigeration?
Air conditioning.
Air conditioning.
So yeah. Dried ice is tricky. There's off-gassing. You also can potentially burn yourself. People sometimes mix it with water and then you get that Halloween smoky look. So I would say cooling is great. If you can have a loved one in a room, if they're at home, either temporarily at home, or the beauty in Oregon, Washington, and many other states, you don't have to hire a funeral director. So I walk people through how to be your own funeral director. And what I tell them is wonderful. Take grandmama and, have her in a little space where we can actually maybe shut the door and have the vents where that room stays cool. And that way we can do that. You can also use ice packs and move them around. The nice thing about standard ice packs or a cooling blanket, it can go into your standard freezer. You can't do that with the dried ice. So it just depends on the scenario. It depends on what the transport is. Is it 100 degrees? you know, there's all these things that we need. There's so many variables that go into it. And that's why you call me or another green end of life person. Doesn't always have to be a funeral director, but somebody, because again, we have a little bit of experience. Hopefully can help you with some of those things.
So in that same vein, how much time can pass before cooling dry ice is needed? For example, if there's a home death and the family wishes to be with the body, how soon is cooling required?
Well, how the law reads, if you're using a funeral home, all right, they're saying within 24 hours, they want somebody buried, cremated, embalmed, or refrigerated. So what I tell a family is if you're going to keep your loved one at home, let's start a little bit early to get ahead of the game, and let's figure out if this will be a cooler space or what you want to do. Now, many things matter. Is the person riddled full of chemotherapy? Are they 400 pounds? Is it 90, 100 degrees out? I mean, again, you know, people will say, well, how long until someone decomposes, or how long until I'm going to see signs of being uncomfortable? One never knows. The body ultimately, once it passes, wants to move towards that state of not being here anymore, but you never know. And I've had good success of keeping people at home for 3-4 days where coloration has been fine and it's been okay. Other times that hasn't worked so well. So it just really depends. But again, you treat a body like when you give them a little sponge bath, you treat them like you did when they were alive. You're gentle, you talk to them. Same thing with putting ice underneath them. Maybe ask them, where would you like the ice to be? And they can help you along. I mean, don't think for a second these entities, you know, aren't still with us in another form, helping us along the path here.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. We are right at the hour here. So I just want to really quickly, again, thank you all for coming tonight. Thank our sponsor, White Eagle Memorial Preserve Cemetery. And thank Lee and Kim for all the work that you've done to bring us all together here and learn so much good information. So Elizabeth, we thank you very, very much.
It's a pleasure to be here. So keep being green and keep doing great things out there with each other.